Thanks for joining today's program on Dyslexia-Friendly Libraries. I'm Jessica Philippe, the Member Engagement Librarian at SCRLC. We're using Zoom webinar today, so your mics and cameras are off for the duration of the webinar, but you're welcome to post questions to the chat. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Nan Carmack, the Director of Library Development and Networking at the Library of Virginia, and Rebecca Warner, a founding member of the Virginia chapter of Decoding Dyslexia and an international speaker on the topic. So thank you both for joining us today.
It's our delight. We are so happy that you're curious about dyslexia and your role as a member of library staff, and what that might mean for you. You know, when we first started talking about that, I was thinking what a scary place libraries might be for people with dyslexia. And so I came into this with very little knowledge about dyslexia and got to meet Rebecca and have learned so much. And so we're excited to share this opportunity with you. Rebecca, do you want to make any remarks before we get going?
Just that I'm so happy to be here again and with you, Nan, and meeting Jessica. The library was the first place I went when my son at 5 years old was failing kindergarten, which I didn't think was possible. And I've always lived within a few blocks of a library, and that's where I went. And as I went through my journey, I never forgot that. And it occurred to me that as we try so hard to get our teachers on board and our doctors, that how about the librarians that are indeed a block away from everybody? And here we are.
And so in her work there, Rebecca's craft is jewelry and design, and she does a lot of these things. And so Rebecca designed this symbol for dyslexia awareness. And Rebecca, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Again, as my son was failing kindergarten, and I started to do the deep dive on what is dyslexia, which is now my message to so many parents don't know what it is. As a jeweler, I had worked with a lot of companies to create pieces of art in the language of art to carry a message that's maybe stronger than words. And dyslexia is a terrible word. Nobody can spell it anyway. And my son, not all dyslexics do this, but was switching around the PQBD letters. And so that symbol is the letters P, Q, B, and D that are all together. I mean, it could be any one of those letters. And they're all squished together in a circle. And the circle to me is sort of that symbol for eternity going on, but holding you together. And it's holding those letters together. I started giving it to my friends who were with me on the journey, and I wore a little pendant, and then it was to the teachers, and I suddenly was like, there's no symbol for dyslexia. And that's how it started.
Oh, very cool. And you can see the website down there, pqbd.org, where you can explore that a little bit further. So today we are going to have a couple of different outcomes. We're going to talk about symptoms and indicators, so what you might be looking for. We're going to learn about comorbidities. There's another terrible word for you, right? Morbid, but it really just means things that exist together, that are co-concurrent, or concurrent, not co-concurrent. That would be redundant. Anywho, so we're going to learn about strategies for helping parents, teachers, and adults as they encounter or have themselves dyslexia. We're going to learn about additional professional development opportunities and how to fund them, and additional educational resources for you. So that's what we're going to be about today. And Rebecca and I both are very informal. So if you have a question, go ahead and pop it in chat. I'm the one screen sharing, so I won't be able to see it. So Rebecca and Jessica, will leave that up to you. We wanted to start our conversation off with about dyslexia is a strength and not a shame. It's certainly something that our culture has turned, ooh, they have dyslexia. It's not better or worse, it's just another way of being. And so we wanted to really start out emphasizing some of those strengths. And you don't really know until you get to know any individual person. As Rebecca often says, if you've met one person with dyslexia, you've met one person with dyslexia. And strengths in any individual with dyslexia are going to center around things that don't involve written verbiage, right? They might be great creative thinking, thinkers, problem solvers, really good at spatial reasoning with empathy. They have strong memories and they have interconnected reasoning, meaning like how do these two ideas fit together? And they're also resilient. And when you think about these strengths in our language heavy world, our written language heavy world, you would have to be those things to be a dyslexia and a person with dyslexia in our culture. So all of these things make great sense to me. And Rebecca, I wonder what strengths you were seeing in your son as he moved from kindergarten now into college. What are some of the strengths that you notice about him?
Oh, absolutely. I felt like my brilliant child. That's like when I said he was failing kindergarten. I couldn't quite understand that. He saw the things and did the things, the Legos, the creative approach. I will say it's a double-edged sword when you talk about the gifts of dyslexia. I did not feel like a gift to me when I was up against, oh my gosh, my child will never read. He will always live in my basement. I'm going to be filling out forms for him for the rest of his life. And there is a book of the gift of dyslexia, and a lot of people go bongos on that terminology. But once you understand like how to harness these strengths, and as a parent, for me, it was how to parent with these strengths. Um, and as my children grow and become adults, and moving into the world with adults, and that this continues, it does not go away. It's part of who you are. It really is an amazing brain, the dyslexic brain. So
Thanks for that. So the important part here is really that you have to find out what their strength is. So perhaps you have an employee, perhaps you have a family member, perhaps you have a patron who you think might be dyslexic. You have a volunteer that might be dyslexic. Find out what they're good at and let them do that rather than focusing on what they can't do, right? Professionally, there's always this desire to strengthen our weaknesses. Well, why don't we spend that time strengthening our strengths rather than just being mediocre at all things, right? And this is the same idea with folks with dyslexia. Find out what their strengths are and amplify that. Find out what you're good at yourself, amplify that, rather than trying to constantly remediate things. So that's a little different twist on what we typically tell ourselves and tell each other about how we should be developing. And I'm going to twist that on its head and suggest that we should be focused on strengths and not weaknesses. So we are part of this answer. And Dr. Kelly Sandman Hurley says, a teacher educated about dyslexia can be the one person that saves a child and his or her family from years of frustration and anxiety. And that teacher can play a pivotal role in changing the whole culture of a school. Well, so can librarians. And I love Rebecca's story about that's the first place she went. Libraries are non-threatening. Libraries are places you can seek information without judgment. And so this idea of us being a conduit to information and resources that can save a child and their family from years of frustration and anxiety is amazing to me. And so I applaud you all for being here today and taking the time to learn about dyslexia and potentially be that person who saves a family from those years of frustration and anxiety. So I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca to talk a little bit about the indicators and symptoms in preschool. You can see we have our citation there at the bottom. And Rebecca, if you'd also share maybe what you observed in your own child, that when you got this diagnosis, what made sense, what didn't make sense?
And it's interesting, and I do want to preface that there are no letters behind my names. Like there, as for a lot of my friends who I started this are now doctors and they tutors and are parts of school. And I went with the art thing, with the symbol and with the conversation and talking about it. But so I'm telling you my experiences and what I've learned along the way. And
but I want to stop you, Rebecca, and don't diminish that, because you're who we see. We see parents.
Yes.
We see family members, and that's who is the first step is on.
Right. No, I take pride in my boots on the ground approach because when people ask me, first, like, what is the definition of dyslexia? What is a lot of people don't even really know what that is. And you can all sit here and Google, we can't watch what you're doing. What is dyslexia? And I like to just give my own twist is it's how that information is going to the child or to the person, and then how it's coming back out. And the brain is processing that information in a different way than the rest of us are, and they're sequencing that information differently. And it's very apparent with reading and writing because the sounds and the phonemes and the graphemes, the symbols are not going to line up correctly. So that's where you get the letters flipping, or you get those syllables will be flipped around. And so when I look at these indicators, it's not just reading. And that's where I kind of get people grumpy sometimes that dyslexia has nothing to do with reading. It greatly affects your reading, and that's important. We all know that reading, writing, and arithmetic, these are important things. But dyslexia it comes from such a more deeper space than just the reading. So don't get caught up in just the reading, even though you're a librarian. You might see it with the delayed speech, or my kid couldn't tie his shoes. He didn't understand the steps, this step, then that step. A combination lock. He couldn't go left to this number, right to this number, and back, that sort of thing. Your left, right, that sort of business. So he always had the ear infections. We finally got the adenoids and the tonsils and all that. He could not rhyme. I'd be like, I don't know, red, and he would be like read. It would be like no, and so yeah, and also preschool. They're so little, they're young. Most people are like, well, you can't tell. All the kids are reading backwards or mirror writing, and that is absolutely true. But all of the research shows if you can catch them early, it's just like think of if you're in the household learning French and your mother speaks French, your dad speaks English, and you start learning French at an early age, you're suddenly bilingual by age 8. It is absolutely the same with dyslexia. It's learning those processes. So
Yeah. So it's a neurological difference, a
yeah.
neurological processing thing. And you're right, it doesn't have anything to do with reading. It has to do with your neurological processing.
Mhm.
And what we then have to do is see what works for them, right? That's really it. But these are what things you can think about on the screen as you encounter kids in your story time, in your different library programming. What are you noticing about various children? And the same with elementary school. But this is where things, I think, from observation, things get harder for kids because, up to grade 3, you're learning to read. After grade 3, you're reading to learn. And this is where the rubber hits the road for parents and teachers and librarians about helping a child cope. So, Rebecca, how was that for you?
Well, this is when decoding dyslexia started. I think Virginia, a couple women, and I sat in my living room, and one of them had heard of this decoding dyslexia, and parent-led grassroots movement, not an organization. Virginia doesn't have a board, or any one of you can go print out a business card that says you're the president of DDVA, and okay, it's like the peace movement.
Yeah.
But we saw power in numbers and our collective experience to raise awareness about dyslexia and to support our kids who are in government schools where this is the way it's being taught. And the indicators and symptoms, as you're saying, by third grade, everybody's like, oh, this magic, he'll just start reading. It'll be amazing. One day he wakes up. And that was not happening for my son. And the teachers did not understand about dyslexia or what the indicators were and what to do about it, and how to approach a child with dyslexia. And so that's when this group of parents, we started decoding dyslexia and started advocating in the schools and in our state legislation about how to raise awareness about these indicators and symptoms. But yeah, Fox was not it's a pattern of strengths and weaknesses with dyslexia. So he was very good at reasoning, and figuring out. So he could usually pass a lot of the tests, but he couldn't read or write in the time frame that was given him. So he would be a 0 in one, but almost 100 in the other. And so he'd be 50-50, and that's fine. He would be normal. But if you looked at him in any one of those areas, he was, they call that twice exceptional. He's up here with this and down here with that. So it was by third grade, it was very apparent to me that Houston, we have a problem that this school system was not going to work for him. So.
Okay, thanks for that.
Mhm.
Oh, here's a few more. Sorry. I think the dread going to school thing is that probably the hardest thing a parent has to deal with. And I know you told me a very moving story about Fox not wanting to go to school.
He put his head down in the third grade and we were doing the words your way. It was this awful, if any of you know of it, but they'd have the oddball word, which all they did was throw in a different syllable pattern and not explain it. And so the kids were like, what, And so he just put his head down and I said, like, sweetie, what's wrong? Let me get out the flashcards because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And he just said, I don't know if I can do it anymore. And I thought he meant his homework. And he just looked at me and said, I can't keep pretending that I read when I go to school. And so he was memorizing books and he was smart enough to like go in there with the whole thing memorized, or if there were plays, he was the only kid who could act because everybody else was reading their lines and he was like acting, and he had memorized everything. And that's when I really was like, okay, I got to help this kid out. And my message to you all in every single one of these slides that the strengths over the shame, there is an undercurrent of shame with these kids. And it's so important because you can have the best dyslexia school and the best tutors and librarians and everybody, if the mental health issue isn't addressed and the level of shame and their understanding of why they're going through this and what's happening, you are dealing with a lot of different issues than syllable patterns and dyslexia. And that really scared me. And I saw that with him in elementary school. Like, I was seeing him really withdraw and everybody hates me and deep dark stuff that I was like, no, we're not doing this.
How old you when you're in third grade, 9?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
about 8 and 9-year-olds having that on their heart, and it breaks man.
That level of anxiety was rough.
So moving on to high school, it's pretty much everything you've seen so far, and all of these. Rebecca, what happened for you and Fox between elementary after third grade and high school?
So as he continued to have a difficult time in third and fourth grade, by fifth grade, decoding dyslexia was in full swing. And I had, as I promised myself, everybody in Richmond, Virginia who knew anything about dyslexia was on speed dial on my phone. And I knew what coffee they drank and what wine they drank and their favorite restaurants. And I made the decision, if I wanted to be an advocate and really get my son the help he needed, I needed to pull him out of public school. And so he went to a private school with dyslexia, and seeing him with the appropriately trained teachers and with the community that got him, where the shame was lifted, and it was night and day. They didn't demand foreign language, which is very difficult for them. They took the kids right to their level and worked on those areas. It was having that. And meanwhile, his younger brother, diagnosed with ADHD, it was just a very interesting piece to see when Fox was in the right place with the right programs and methods that were appropriate for him, how he was excelling. And to this day, I'm like, what if we hadn't done that? Because it was not cheap, let me tell you. It was very expensive and a leap of faith to yank your kid out of that space. So high school, all of these things was him. He was in the 4th percentile for vocabulary and decoding, which spelling. Actually, I take that back. He was in the 4th percentile for spelling, which is decoding. His vocabulary was actually good because meanwhile, I had read every book under the sun from Laura Ingalls Wilder and Lloyd Alexander and The Hobbit and Harry Potter, thinking he'd just magically start reading was what they'd said. But his he couldn't write his own name. Fox Warner. He always messed up the Warner. Of course, the Spanish was terrible. the music classes. I play banjo and I'm trained, nope, so yeah.
Ugh, what a journey.
And actually, Nan, on that slide, I just want to let your librarians know with that last bit about dropping out. In Virginia, this is a stat. I looked this up 3 times because I couldn't believe it, but 70% of your kids that are in special education are there for a specific learning disability, which is dyslexia. Most, if you're in it with your not reading and writing and all that, it's this dyslexic profile. And of the kids in special ed, 1 in 3 of them will drop out of high school. It's just a high rate of dropout from that special ed bit. And if you drop out of high school, the next stat is that 1 in 3, it's 1 in 3 kids are in jail by the time you've dropped out of high school. And this starts that pipeline to prison conversation, which again, I'm wanting to empower you librarians to, to really see the statistics here, kid with dyslexia doesn't have the freaky mom who went and got everybody's speed dial with what wine they drank. They don't do well in high school and drop out, and they're in jail for because they're smart people. These are very smart people, and they're trying to make whatever work, and it doesn't work. So I just wanted that's
Yeah, absolutely. And that does bring to bear, as we look at the next slide, libraries that serve correctional facilities. A lot of us do have some sort of level of outreach to correctional facilities. And we think, well, why is it not working? Why aren't they wanting these books? I don't have the specific data on it, but so many of people who are incarcerated have a learning disability, and went straight from that school pipeline to prison. And so when you're thinking about library services to the incarcerated, these are things you need to be thinking about, because they're going to exhibit everything we've talked about so far to all of the things that you see on the screen. Difficulty, putting that thoughts onto paper, and, incarcerated individuals, like, they don't even have that, right?
right.
So these are just all things that you really need to think about as you're encountering adults that don't seem to quite be where you think they should be. And the one thing that really stands out to me, and this is true for, in my opinion, I do have a master's in education, so I say a little bit with some authority. Sometimes when people are tired and they are sick, all of this gets worse. Because if you think about how when you have a head cold and you just have brain fog and people are expecting things from you, and the level of energy it takes to think something through, that's what a person with dyslexia has to do constantly. So when they're tired or they're sick, these things are going to be pronounced.
Yeah.
Rebecca, how are things now that Fox is a grown man?
So it's been a very interesting, and Nan and I were talking before this. We've been doing this little bit since before COVID and beyond. And Fox is now 21. I just saw him for Thanksgiving, and his brother is 19. So they are out of the house. And it's been very interesting to me as a parent of now adult children to grow my advocacy. I'm not discontinuing looking at children. I still think that's so important, the young kids' early identification. But I will say that I hadn't looked at adults as much because I was in the throes with my babies just when you and I met. And Fox is now attending Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology in Indiana. It was a school that was recommended by one of his math teachers. Math is his jam. At the dyslexia school he went to, and I cannot be more impressed with a school that deals with neurodiversity the way this program does. And it's parenting him just through that first freshman year has opened up again with my advocacy to realize the kind of accommodations that college students can get. And then during COVID, in this time, I also took a job. I'm the executive assistant for a very dyslexic ADHD CEO of a big company. It sounds crazy, but they do proteins. They make all the chicken on your salad at Chopped. but and helping him get through his day and what how he communicates and what he needs, and then looking at my son, it's been very interesting for me um, to get that message out about these type of symptoms and how as a society we can support not just the kids but the adults in our lives and the people all around us who are dyslexic and either figured out how to deal with it or didn't and are missing out and could we can help them out. So it's an exciting space for me. Just when so many women I met, I remember being in my 30s, early 40s, and they were like, I'm done. My kid's out of the house and in college and they can figure it out now. And I was kind of like, okay, I'm done. And I'm like, gosh, how can I let go of this information? And then realizing it doesn't stop. You don't stop being dyslexic, and it doesn't stop being an issue when you're an adult. Hopefully, with things like the Virginia Literacy Act, one of the laws we changed, we will have a different set of adults with different tools in the toolbox for what they need. But it continues.
Thank you. I'm so glad. Can't imagine anybody else that can fill your shoes in this space in Virginia, Rebecca. All right. So here are those comorbidities we were talking about. All of the different kinds of ways that our neurology processes things. Dysgraphia is writing. Dyscalculia, I can never say that. I always want to call it the Dracula one. That's the numbers. But then you add in dyspraxia, which is speech. You add in all of these other spectrum-based disorders, and dyslexia is comorbid with all of them. So these auditory processing disorders, visual processing disorders, executive functioning, and then both types of attention disorder. These are all neurological issues. These are not behavioral issues. These are ways people's brains work. And I think that one thing in my exploration of all of this, it all did start with Rebecca. Like Rebecca called me up and said, "Hi, you don't know me." Like that's really, and I'm like, cool, I'll listen. And we had all of these realizations. So not only did we have been doing this dyslexia work, I've been looking at other types of neurodiversity. And what I've really learned about that is the way we have structured our world only favors one type of neurology. And there's all these other neurologies that exist. And we have elevated the average and made all of these other ways of thinking and being outliers. And there are outliers because there are fewer people with them. But what a richer society we would have if we didn't say, oh, this is what a typical neurology looks like, and that's all we're shooting for. What if we said, look at this large encompassing neurology that makes our world so much richer? And so that has really stuck with me. And whenever I see this graph, it reminds me of that. Yeah. So, and I think the one that is the hardest is this anxiety and depression that surrounds it, because our culture has created this othering of people whose neurology, by no fault, and is there even a fault? I don't think so, by their own natural difference. So Rebecca, why don't you explain this graph to us?
So last month I was in Japan speaking. I had two engagements. One was speaking with parents. I love speaking with, it doesn't matter what country you're from, we all have the same story, like they're failing kindergarten. So I was with a parent group, and then this graph was used in a conference. They still call it the LD conference. It's the Learning Disability. And I'm like, learning difference, but it's the Learning Disability Conference of Japan. And this is the spring quarter at Rose-Hulman, where my son goes to school, of the students who are receiving academic accommodations, the neurodiverse breakdown. And so the gray area that says learning disability, 39, is the dyslexic kids. You got your ADHD is that huge blue bit. which a lot of dyslexic and ADHD, that there's that comorbid piece. You've got your general bit of the psychological disability, autism, the chronic health and hard of hearing and all that. But this graph to me was interesting so in Japan, where they don't have, this is where I do feel happy with America. I think we do have the Americans Disability Act. We do have the for children, the individuals with disabilities, the IDA, and we have a plan in place for No Child Left Behind, whereas in Japan, you just got nothing. And the shame in Japan, where there's a million books written about shame, and for these, you really hide you're disabled. So I wanted to show this breakdown of kind of in a proud way, this school is that how colleges in America are embracing the neurodiverse and elevating them and lifting them. I mean, these are all kids in a top engineering program, and they might have autism or they might be dyslexic or so. It's kind of a new space, I feel like, and maybe you guys can educate me on this, but the conversation about neurodiversity in the workplace and in our higher education, and how we can support and help with the new knowledge we have coming out every day with the science of reading, or with different studies being done about support and how information is being processed. And I mean, unfortunately, I think, well, not unfortunately, I was going to say it's a money thing, but schools, businesses, people are going to, when the kids do well and the students do well, there's more money, that businesses are going to do better. So I think there is a motivation here. So I think these kind of graphs and charts, the school has this out at Rose, and I found it interesting.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for that.
Mhm.
So, the teachers and the parents really are the folks on the front lines here. And of course, the adult individuals, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But just noticing the differences, which is really what we're about here today, is like, here's what you might notice. Well, what do you do with that information? Let the parents know, mention it to the parents, and continue educating yourself, sharing your knowledge with others, telling folks, hey, you should go watch that SCRLC video on dyslexia. I learned a lot, or I hope you do. Anyway, but Rebecca, I know I was really interested in hearing your story and what you had to exactly say to a school to get accommodations or to get evaluated, because that is expensive and schools avoid it. And there was some very specific language that, librarians could suggest to parents to say, hey, you need to go to your school and tell the teacher what.
Right.
Yeah.
So public schools with the IEP process, which is an individual education plan for kids with special education, in order to get the special education status and to receive those services, you have to go through a series of tests that would allow you that show that you're eligible for special ed. And the very, very first thing they do is what's called a child study. And I don't think this is where, once you know your rights, I think we all know this, when you know your rights and you've got that information in your head, you have a lot of power. And if you go and ask for a child study, the school must perform this test. There's definitely a smaller test before they do the full-on WISC and the psychological evaluation. But there's an initial child study where the school must test the child to see if they're eligible for the next phase of special ed. And I think I mean, what I'm hoping from our whole presentation, if pay attention, but is that the librarians, this is not, I'm not asking you to get a master's in, syllable patterns for Orton Gillingham. This is just, if you know very, very basic, in about a half an hour watching a few modules, you can understand to recognize when the mom, me, walks in with my little boy and like, Fox isn't really reading, that you might just go, oh, let's look at some of these, why is he not reading and what's going on? Just listen to the parent. And the first thing is say, well, have you done any testing at the school? Have you talked with his teachers? And you might say you should ask for a child study. Now, this is the state of Virginia. I do know, Nan, I'm realizing I'm talking in New York, that maybe that rhetoric is different, but this is a federal law, which might change. But right now, you can say, it is, I would like to I would like to conduct a child study, and the school is required by law to do that, period.
Yeah.
And that's federally mandated. So I didn't know that as a mother, and I'll never forget. I was in a meeting, and I kept saying, I was all these teachers, and I was like, I just don't feel like Fox, something's going on, and whatever. And one of the teachers who was sort of a friend looked at me and said, "Are you requesting a child study?" And it was the way she couched it, and she looked at me with that and I suddenly was like, I'm Rebecca Warner, and I'm requesting a child study for my son. And everybody's notebooks came out, and they were like, oh, the parent has requested a child study for their son. And I was like, really? You all could have done that 3 meetings ago, because it is all time frame. Then you have 30 days before that's done and 90 days to conduct. It's time, and time is very precious at this age. So just a librarian saying you should request a child study could save that family, a year of wallow.
Cool. Thanks for that. So one of the pro tips for not adults, right? Anybody from the littles to the bigs, is the gift of time. I do teach in a MLIS graduate school, teaching future librarians. And one of the things that is easy for me to do, even if the person doesn't have an official accommodation letter, is say, I really struggle. It's an online program, so everything's either about writing or making a video presentation. If I know and they ask for it, I can say, sure, take 3 extra days. The time, because most of them, if they've gotten to me, right, they've been pretty successful. They just need the extra time to process what they need to do, right? Because there isn't the option of classroom manipulation, of spontaneous conversation, et cetera, et cetera. So giving people extra time, and this may be true if you have coworkers with dyslexia. Maybe, it takes everybody else, 15 minutes to finish their time card. Maybe this person needs 30 minutes. So just be conscious of that gift of time. Further with adults, notice the signs that we've talked about if someone's struggling. But again, most importantly, what are their strengths? Is there something that you can draw them a diagram instead of a paragraph, right? If they're having to read meeting notes, can you do the bullet points of takeaways instead of having to read full sentences? For professional development, I hope you're all requiring professional development or participating in professional development. Allow audiobooks, podcasts, and videos to be accepted transmissions of professional development. And again, play to their strengths and increasing your own knowledge. Rebecca, what else have I missed?
Some of the simplest layman's things, like I've learned with my boss, like when he calls me up and says, hey, what are you doing? And I launch into whatever the heck I'm doing, he's called me for a reason. And this is probably good, polite common sense with anything, but either I know, like, pause, that giving time. It's also in conversations with my kid or my boss. I also, like, if he's in mid-sentence to me about something he needs and suddenly he stops in the middle of it, I know he's reading. Like, something, they cannot multitask. Like, he cannot read a text and have a conversation with me at the same time. So some of it is just a matter of that space in a conversation, or the pause. My son, like, has something wonderful he wants to say, and he never really said, in a conversation, my younger son will talk over him with a friend over there, and I've learned just to that pause. There's so many, it's subtle, and maybe we should all do that anyway, but with a dyslexic, it's that kind of a piece. These are all speaking to that a bit, but that's one tidbit.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, does texting help your boss, your son? Is that it?
We
Or is
get
it hard?
text. Like, so my son, this whole revolution of put your phone away and plug out. I looked at his phone the other day and he had like 2,000 texts that he hadn't read. So he's not one to scroll, like to, and my other son is constantly texting with his girlfriend. Um, and so there is that there, and then you get these crazy texts that don't make any sense. And I've prided myself, and my boss will send me something that looks like it's garbledy-gook, and I know, oh, he needs me to send this document over to DocuSign, or it's like, but
You have to use your own decoding skills.
yeah.
Right.
But again, like Fox can read now, and he talks. We actually talked about that. He said, I can read and write now. I just need the time. And that slide about time, I'm so glad you put that in here because honestly, he said, honestly, I think I could do the whole 9 yards. It's just the time factor. And one of his accommodations are he gets extra time on tests and exams. He had a scribe that was paid for by the school to take notes. His handwriting's atrocious, and he can't do the multitasking. If you're saying something and he's writing it, he has to choose. Do I either pay attention to know what to write, or do I? He couldn't do both. This kind of support is what I also offer my boss.
Yeah.
I'm a scribe, I'm writing his emails, that sort of thing. So that kind of help is great with.
Yeah. So, to those of you watching, this style of presentation would not work for someone with dyslexia because we are expecting you to read the screen while we're talking to you. And not talking about necessarily exactly what's on the screen. So that's an example of how we can function and work simultaneously with different neural pathways that folks with dyslexia are going to struggle with.
Yeah. Although I will say that the advantage, like my boss he talks about how there's many conversations in a room, and it's a constant chess game with that reasoning thing. And he can hear all the conversation, knows what everybody's saying, and he somehow knows what they want. And then for his business brain, he can play out the chess moves ahead and knows what price to put for the tenderloin. It's just like
That's the strength, right? He's got this
right.
relational thing that he
Right.
can think through that the rest of us go, how'd you get there? That's a miracle.
And Nan, can I also say, Carrie Banks put a note in there that to request that child study in Virginia, we say child study, and she's saying it's just request for an evaluation. And that might be if I had said that at the time, I would like to request an evaluation of my son. That might have been enough. The child study buzz is maybe just Virginia. So thank you.
Yeah, so whoever's watching this out there in the world with recording, make sure you go ask someone what your locality's buzzwords are. Because saying the right words, make sure that they can't just slip out. Oh, well, they never asked us for a child study.
And
Come on.
knowing your rights with public schools, which gives them a footing above private, by the way. Private does not have to adhere to these rules. But when you ask for a study, your goal for doing that is to tailor your child's education.
Yeah.
And there's two routes you can go. You can get a 504, which is just accommodations, or you can get the full-on IEP, which is those accommodations with teaching instruction that is a specific method of teaching that might not be offered to the full class.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the Cadillac. That's what I wanted for my kids, was not just extra time and a quiet room. I wanted the instruction to be instruction that Fox could understand. And you kind of have to, unfortunately, it's expensive and they don't want to pay the money. So that turned into a little bit of that's the struggle.
So for you as a librarian out there watching this, a library staff member, where can you learn more? We've got a couple of really good resources for you. We are going to make sure Jessica has the link to this so you can get the clickable links. Decoding Dyslexia VA, of course, is a Facebook group in Virginia, but you can use your library skills to go and find the Decoding Dyslexia in New York. So they are a grassroots organization, just as Rebecca was saying. These are parents. AIM VA, that's again a Virginia, of course we're in Virginia, so our resources are heavily geared that way. But one of the things that we did in 2019, just before the pandemic hit, was to create this challenge called Dyslexia-Friendly Libraries. And it was an awareness challenge of people, of library staff across the Commonwealth that could do the tasks within that challenge and get some swag from us, as well as complete some professional development. And from that, we were going to move into dyslexia-friendly libraries as the model that libraries needed to, if they had X amount of staff trained, if they had a collection, and there were lots of things. And then the pandemic hit. And so everybody had their bottles shaken up. And so dyslexia-friendly libraries took a bit of a backseat. We're starting to head back in that direction now, 4 years out. William and Mary, my alma mater, the College of William and Mary, has a really great self-paced 6-part module that really gets into the data. I haven't completed it. Rebecca, I know you have. Have you? What would you like to say about that?
With the modules,
Yeah.
I mean, so that was one of our big legislation pieces with decoding dyslexia in the very, very beginning. Was the Department of Education in Virginia has a module that all teachers must watch in order to get their licensure, and it's like 40 minutes long. And if you go, I just put in the chat there, decodingdyslexiavirginia.org, the website, and you can. I think it has all of these links. But the William and Mary TTAC, there's some deep dives about the syllable patterns, which I kind of gloss over, but there's everything we've been talking about. That's been a strong route for me, and the woman who helped develop that. There's several women that are friends of mine, but yeah, I strongly, if this interests you at all and you want to say, learn more, that would be a great place to go.
Like the gold standard of what's available that's out there for free.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, we'll turn it over to you guys and answer what questions you might have.
Thank you both. Thanks for sharing your experience and your advocacy. So you can feel free to put questions into the chat. I'm going to put a link to a brief survey in there as well. And that was a great point about the slides. I think if we mention up front to people, like, you will get the slides, don't worry about taking notes, that can make people feel less need to multitask. And we'll send out a link to this recording as well.
Yeah, it looks like Carrie might be your go-to person for what's on the ground in New York. So
Yes.
I think the biggest thing I'm hoping is that I hope we don't intimidate people. Like when I think of my 10, 12 years, whatever, of learning this stuff, but honestly, if you watch like that 40-minute module, just a brief understanding. I mean, go to a cocktail party and just say, is anybody here dyslexic? It's 1 in 5 people. And you always get, I always get someone who raises their hand. And it's just, they're very interesting people, and it's interesting their experiences, and to just better understand that, and just to shift your own personal view on that, what is a dyslexic is huge for those people walking in the door. The acceptance, slower processing. Oh, okay. I was just reading Katie's comment.
Carrie as well. Yeah.
So how many people? We could do the cocktail party right now. How many people do we have? There should be about 6, at least 6 people, although it might be a little lopsided because this is a dyslexia thing. But yes, the Dyslexia-Friendly Library Challenge would be something that would work well with a small group of librarian staff.
yeah, let me dig around a little bit and find the one, because so Libraryland, you'll know what Niche Academy is, right? Right now ours it's a pathway, a Niche Academy, but you can't put pathways out into Marketplace. So we put it back up somewhere so that just anybody could get to it. Oh, here it is.
Challenge, the Dyslexia-Friendly Challenge.
Yeah.
We have
I know I have it on my website, pqbd.org.
Yeah, I found it. And it's also got the bibliography and stuff.
Where did it go?
There it is. And in Libraryland, we love rip off and duplicate, right? Our R&D. feel free. I'm going to stop sharing my thing so I can see you guys better. Feel free to just take what's there and make your own.
Yeah,
You
we'll
know,
play around with that since we have Niche Academy. Maybe we could
Yeah.
put an instance of that on ours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sonora is asking about recommendations for juvenile books and purchasing for the libraries. And there's so many great books out there that it's kind of, I mean, Nan and I have talked about, one of the reasons I reached out to Nan is I have a group of about a dozen libraries in Australia that wanted to use the symbol to put onto books to designate them dyslexia books. And Nan immediately pointed out, like, are we talking about, why is the balloons? Look at the balloons. Are we talking about, like, is it Percy Jackson who's dyslexic, or is it a self-help book about dyslexia? Is it a method of training? What is it? And so if you, Sonora, a simple Google search, and there's so many areas with that. There's a couple websites. Understood.org is one that I love. The International Dyslexia Association is an area, is an they have websites in New York. They have a chapter. There's a great Decoding Dyslexia New York chapter. If you just Google Decoding Dyslexia New York, you can usually find links with all these bibliographies, but we have a link, Nan, that we can provide too. But it's kind of what are you after, like books for kids to read? There's some special books that they use simple syllable patterns. So you have like the consonant, vowel, consonant words where you don't have, like, it's the vowels that mess them up every time because you have all the options of sounds and your sequencing goes haywire. So there's a lot of purchasing options.
One that I've seen is Aaron Slater Illustrator. It's part of that series. There's like Iggy Peck Architect. It's about second graders, and this particular student has dyslexia, and it's dealing with his experience. And they're really cute books for like early elementary school level.
Yeah, I feel like I sat here next to my bookshelf, I could start holding up books, but I won't do that to you.
Yeah. And honestly, guys, you work in libraries. You have access to people who know how to find the best books. So go librarian on that stuff. It's a great collection development activity too. And in fact, that's one of the activities in the Dyslexia Friendly Library is evaluating your catalog. So there's a step right there within the Dyslexia Friendly Library Challenge. We did do this challenge in October of 2019. October is Dyslexia Awareness Month. We reissued it this year. Rebecca, I don't know if you knew that. That we did it again. And we had, of course, as you all know, there's been a huge turnover in libraries since the pandemic. So we had about 40 new people take the challenge. And we always have some swag. Rebecca provided bookmarks, beautiful bookmarks that she had designed on her PDQ button. And I printed them out a fancy certificate and had a LVA sticker. And so everybody that did it got a little bit of swag. And that symbol on their lanyard, as that symbol spreads for awareness, if somebody comes in and sees that, they know, they're like, oh, cool.
And just to reiterate, that library challenge, which I think is a couple hours of time, you're going to have more information than like all of the teachers' requirements in the state of Virginia. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but we did just pass the Virginia Literacy Act in Virginia. That's also, I think, such a valuable piece of legislation because it's not only going to provide the appropriate instruction, but it's going to change our higher ed curriculum. And they're going to stop doing some of the programs that actually were not working. I mean, if you all go back for those of us that are older and remember when we did phonics that got dropped along the way, they're bringing that back a bit. So
this is a big push in New York State as well, all the way.
Virginia Literacy Act. I need to put a link in there, but I'll just write it in there because I think this is, I would love to see more states adopt something like this. And we're still working on it. It initially went from kindergarten to third grade, and then we got to third to fifth. We're eking it up to where it will hopefully be with everyone, but it's a great piece of legislation. It's what we worked for 10 years as parents.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I've seen it kind of firsthand as I have a fifth grader and now kindergartners. And I think my kindergartners, because it's been in the last year or two that they're switching back to this science of reading curriculum, like I'm already seeing their progress versus her progress, which just stalled out. And it's wild as a parent to see that, but it's really
Yeah.
nice to see
And
that we're working towards that.
yeah, as an older person, it's interesting to watch the pendulum swing between trends, right?
Mhm.
When I was a child, we did a combination of context and phonics. I can read, right? Then they just focused on phonics and left out the context. Then they went straight to context and left out the phonics. So can we just all agree?
For all the New York folks here, one of my funny stories that I will never forget is very, very early decoding dyslexia. I got an appointment with a couple other moms, so we went up to the Department of Education and we had our whole spiel. And thinking back now, I called it the Cadillac. I said we need to, and it was everything the Virginia Literacy Act is now. It was like we need to get the new, take out this, put in this, change this, awareness, and all that. And we were like 20% of the population is dyslexic. That's 1 in 5 people. And these kids are not being met. And I did all those stats about dropping out. And I remember him looking at me, he said, if this was true, you'd have everybody in the streets of New York like rioting about literacy. And I just remember sliding my eyes over at the woman next to me. And that was like okay, ready? It was like the challenge. So we never went to New York screaming, but kind of.
Mary Carol, I do not know. Maybe Rebecca does. Is cursive writing being reintroduced with this? With the Literacy Act? I don't think so because I
Oh,
haven't heard
yes,
anything about it.
they did away with cursive, and that's a big help for dyslexics. In fact, that's
Mhm.
something we could put in our helping kit. They
Mhm.
don't know when to start and stop, but that like the copying is one of the hardest things for dyslexics to do, and the fluidity of the cursive has been. And this is not just trendy; it's the science of reading. There's a lot of science to back this all up now, and that's where we're demanding the science be addressed. So
And
yes,
that's, it's obviously not true for every learner. That cursive can, for typical learners, cursive can be easier because you're not having to stop and start.
hmm
Whereas for a dyslexic neural processing, it's the starting and the stopping that helps them.
yeah.
So there's, this is where I go back to individuation, right? We need to be treating the people how they need to be treated, not based on an average.
Yeah, that was something my daughter shared. She learned cursive when we moved abroad, and she had been reversing her letters for years and struggling to learn to read. And she just told me casually one day, well, with cursive, I don't mix them up anymore. I was like, oh my gosh.
Mhm.
It goes back to that individual. What does that person need? So,
Yeah. I have
but
one more question before we close, because
Mhm.
you mentioned Orton Gillingham. So was that the method of tutoring that was used in your son's school?
Orton Gillingham, and this is actually a great question. Those are the names of two different doctors who put together a structured literacy approach, a method of teaching a dyslexic to read. But when people demand Orton Gillingham in schools, it's like demanding Kleenex when what you want is facial tissue, right? So there are many facial tissues now. You've got your Barton, your Wilson, your Spiral. What is it? There's different programs. Orton Gillingham was the first, and it's a big name recognition. But you're looking for structured literacy, a multisensory kind of a multisensory approach, and there's lots of brands. And if you hear the words Orton Gillingham, they have an academy where they create the teachers that will teach this, so that they still hold it's a very stringent academy, and they're high in the ranks of structural literacy, but they're not the only program. In fact, my son's school did a blend of all of those programs and created their own kind of school. They weren't just an Orton Gillingham school,
That's
which they
I have a mom friend who's a big advocate like you are
yeah
for her son, and she was saying we need OG tutors, and I was like,
yeah
yeah, we need old school, like original gangster tutors. I thought she was referring to, and then it was like, oh, you're talking
yeah.
about Orton
OG
Gillingham.
tutors are great. Don't get me wrong, but if you have a tutor and they say, "Well, I'm not OG certified. I do blah blah blah," blah 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 might be just as good as OG. But when you hear that, it is the gold star standard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I do want to honor both of your time. So thank you so much for being here. And thanks to
Yeah.
everybody who joined us today. And I wish you all a good rest of your day.
Thank you for having us so much. Everybody take good care and have a good holiday.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.